it's mostly me speaking. I got quite a bit of images, so so you can visualize better what I'm talking about. But do not hesitate to interrupt me and ask questions. I prefer to have them as I'm speaking than that I have to remember what I said like an hour ago. Uh, so my presentation has basically four parts. I'm gonna start with my introduction. I'm gonna talk about what is I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. Okay, I'm gonna talk about the genealogy of transit-oriented development in Greater Paris, meaning how the idea of transit-oriented development, how different projects in Greater Paris evolved over the years from the post-war period up to the present, more or less. And my intention in my presentation is to kind of navigate between two scales. That is the regional scale, that is what I concentrated on my research, my regional strategies for inclusive and sustainable development. But also, especially today, I'm going to talk about Bobigny. Bobigny is a small municipality in the metropolitan area of Paris. And my idea is that we navigate a bit about the intentions and discourses of regional plans for the region, for Greater Paris, and how this was translated into the municipality of Bobigny. So I'm going to start with an introduction, where I'm going to talk a bit about the concept of transit-oriented development, in case you're not familiar with it. Then I jump to this historical evolution from the post-war era to now. I'm going to share some conclusions that I came after my research, and I also want to propose some questions for us to discuss together, if that's okay. So, what is transit-oriented development? Is it a concept that you have come across before? No? Does any of you work with transport specifically? Like, has an interest in transport specifically?
I work in the area of road safety.
Okay. So, I'm gonna start with that. So, the idea of transit-oriented development is, roughly speaking, a model where you would connect the density and new developments around transport nodes. So you'd use, for example, bus stations, metro stations as areas of interest to concentrate development, so that it facilitates the movement of people around the city, around a region. That's overall the idea. And it's a type of development that encourages high density around these nodes, but also mixed land use. So you wouldn't have only residential uses around stations, but you would also encourage commercial uses, you would encourage leisure activities, like all types of activities that can happen in the city, so that in a way, like in a small scale, it's like creating a small city around like a transit node. And the overall idea is to reduce car dependence and to promote more sustainable cities, because if you have everything close by, or you have a transport network that is capable of bringing you where you need to go when you need to go, you would be less dependent on individual car use. So that's the overall idea of transit-oriented development. And this model that I just spoke with you about, it is a model that is double scale. That is, you can think about a TUD model at the neighborhood scale. That is what you have on the left here. That's what you have on the left here. That is, as you can see on this model, you have an area that you have residential use, you have a transit commercial activities, you have and everything around like a transit stop. But you can also think about the same model, the same station, being distributed regionally through areas of interest, would create some sort of polycentric way of developing the city, and that's what is shown on the image to your right. It is as if you imagine that each one of these circles is this model, like this model integrated by a bigger network of transport. Usually, big cities in Europe have to allow for rail infrastructure to make these connections between centers, because the rail has assumed some sort of prominent role in the sustainable development agenda. And then, so I'm talking about transit-oriented development because, as an introduction to tell you about the project of the Grand Paris Express that has been going on in Paris, the project is very much guided by those principles. That is, you would use stations, you would use especially rail stations as new centers for the neighborhoods that they are being built at. But also, the project proposes like an enlargement of the network that already exists in Paris in a circular manner, which is kind of new for what has been done in the past 60 to 80 years. That's what we're going to talk about. Has any of you ever heard of the Grand Paris Express? No? Okay. So it is a project that has been going on since 2009. It was approved in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And the overall idea is that you have they are constructing 300 kilometers of new metro lines. So this is twice the extension of the current metro system of Paris. 68 new stations, all connected to RER. RER is like the S-Bahn here, so like a bit like faster connections. And like buses and trams, and they expect 3 million passengers per day. It has cost about an estimated 2012 that it was going to cost 5 billion euros, but it has already surpassed this value with some adjustments. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna explain to you how the region, the planning authorities of Greater Paris got to this configuration. Why did they choose these places to be connected by this metro network? Why is this metro network so expensive? And what are the negotiations that are behind this? This is the biggest infrastructure project that is happening in Europe today. So if you're ever curious, they have a lot of materials in English and not only in French about the infrastructure, the project. So to talk about that, I'm going to go back to before I forget. More than being an infrastructure project, the Grand Paris Express is some sort of infrastructure fix for Greater Paris. Greater Paris is a quite fragmented region, and a big transport has been somehow. How can I explain that? A lot of value has been put into transport infrastructure to bridge this fragmentation, not only physically but also socially. So there's a big battle the connection, like the interconnected areas will help this solve spatial and social disparities that have been going in the region. And the project of the Group Paris Express has two narratives that help supporting it. That is the narrative of territorial equity. That's what I just said. If you have more infrastructure in places that before were not served by infrastructure, you're creating a more balanced region instead of having infrastructure concentrated in specific areas of the region. And also, there's another discourse of climate resilient development. That is, we're moving away from the car, we're moving away from modes of transport that are polluting, and we are talking about rail as being the ultimate solution for metropolitan displacement, not displacement, metropolitan traveling in the region. I'm talking about these two aspects because throughout my research, what I did is that I investigate this narrative. I investigate these two narratives, the narrative of inclusion and the narrative of sustainability, to show how those two types of discourses have been used at times as a justification for urban transformation and sometimes as an end goal. So that's where we're going to jump to this historical perspective. So I'm going to start by explaining a little bit about the regional planning history of Paris. Like what were the intentions behind the regional planning authorities. So if we go back to the 50s, this is a map of Paris back in the 50s of the populational density of the region. So is anyone of you familiar with Paris? Have you visited? Have you have an idea of the administrative levels? Okay.
A long time ago.
So roughly, this core here is the city of Paris. Everything that is outside this core, there are other towns that are part of the metropolitan area that compose Greater Paris, but they are not the city of Paris. They're part of this larger metropolitan organization. So until the 50s, there was no regional planning per se. There was no entity responsible for regional planning in Greater Paris. There would be some collaborations between the city of Paris and other municipalities, but they were always punctual. There was not a large strategy per se for the region. And then in the 50s, they created this new organization that was the Institut Paris-Région. That was an entity created by the state to coordinate regional development. So it was the first time that there was a public organization responsible to facilitate, to think about the region as a whole, and not only about the city of Paris or the metropolitan area separately, let's put it this way. And to start those plans, they started a study to understand what were the bigger problems that were happening in the region. So there are, the first thing that they identified is that Paris is overcrowded if compared to the rest of the region. What we have in this image is that each black dot represents 200 people. So that's why they came to the conclusion that the Paris was beyond its capacity at the time, and that people were spread over the region in a kind of sparse way. they also observed that this is another part of the study, but they also observed that the population was growing and that this growth was happening not in the city of Paris, but it was happening on the Paris region. And then this study set two important principles. That is, for planning for the future. That is, that they needed a more balanced region. So less people living in Paris, more people living throughout the region in a more equilibrated manner. And also that the intention was not to create a region that was dependent on Paris, but a polycentric region, meaning that they also wanted to create other centers in the region so that all the inhabitants of there would not be so dependent on the city of Paris, that they could be able to navigate their work life, their leisure life, without being so codependent in the Paris city. Just so we understand a bit better this image, can you imagine what are these like empty spaces in this image?
Like water.
Water, yes. We have water here, right? That's where like the sun is passing.
Forest.
Forests, yes. So we have like 2 or 3 big parks here that are also part of the city, next to the city, and we have like some forests up north. Also here we have a big forest. What else? What creates like not empty spaces, but why would people not be living there?
The 2 airports.
Yes. At the time it was only one airport.
Only.
Yeah, just the airport. Yeah. But there was a project to create the new airport of Charles de Gaulle. I think it was just a couple of years after this study. That is a bit like this big empty area with that. What else? So airports are a type of infrastructure. What other types of infrastructure would like? Industry, yes, also. Especially when you look here on this like northeast part, there were a lot of this was an area. The northeast was an area that went through a very early process of industrialization, and that's also why like the population kind of was a bit dispersed, was around like industrial areas. What else? Dump yard, yeah, also. We also have like big railway infrastructures that were there because of the early industrialization. This doesn't happen today. Most of the industries were transferred somewhere else, countryside of France, or even like these industrial activities have evolved over time. But before that, the rail was an important part of this like industrial system, because industry would be really like next to the city of Paris. This is kind of there's this ring that goes around the city. Do you know what it is? It's
A highway.
It's a highway. Yes, it's a highway. And this highway today is built in the same, on top of where the former walls of Paris used to be. So before the walls, after the walls were demolished, they constructed this highway that like circumvents the city of Paris, and somehow, and at the same time connects and separates the city from the rest of the region. So I just wanted to talk a little about that, so you have more or less of an idea of what was happening at the time. So after setting these two presets, like we need to distribute better the population, and we also need to create new centers for the region. This was part of our first study and an important document for the first regional planning document that came in the 60s. However, about like 4 years later, in 64, there was an administrative reform. And on this administrative reform, what they did is that they shift the borders of the department. Meaning that, so the way that the administration levels are organized in France is that you have the city, like what they call the community. After the city, you have what they call a department, that is a collection of towns and cities inside a certain. And you would have the next thing that you would have would be the region, where it would be like a collection of departments for the region. So those are like the three bigger administrative levels that you have. Also from the city, you would have like smaller organizational levels, but they're not relevant to what I'm speaking. So what happened was that, so in the Ile-de-France region, that is where the Greater Paris is, there were two big departments, and they decided to break them down, let's put it this way, make smaller departments that will be more manageable for regional development. And when they created these new departments, they decided that each one of those departments would have like a prefecture, like a city hall, that would be the city hall for the department. And Bobigny was chosen to receive, to become like the seat of the Seine-Saint-Denis department. The Seine-Saint-Denis department being the northeast area of Paris. So I'm going to talk a bit about Bobigny, and then I'm going to talk about how being the department changed, being the seat of the department has changed the dynamics. Bobigny is a city on the northeast of Paris. So here we have the limit of Paris, we're showing you. And Bobigny is just over there. It's a town of about 55,000 inhabitants. 30 to 35% of those inhabitants are foreign nationals. They have a very young population. A quarter of the population is under 30 years old. There's quite an elevated rate of single-parent households. Compared to the income of the region, Bobigny has a median income of 46% below the region. It has an elevated unemployment rate, and it also has an elevated percentage of inactive population. So before Bobigny becoming the seat of this department, before any regional intervention came to the area, Bobigny was known for the agricultural practices. As I showed you just here, so Bobigny was quite close to Paris, right? And most of the fruits and vegetables of the city were grown in the city of Bobigny, in the town of Bobigny. And you would have this kind of like spatial configuration where you would have individual homes. You would also have big spaces big plots for agriculture. There was like a strong practice of street markets to sell fruits and vegetables, but also there was a very early train and bus connection to the city center of Paris, so they could sell what was being grown in the city center. Those pictures, they are quite old. They are maybe from the 30s, 2030s. And as the city affairs itself started to grow, Bobigny also started like changing character. But what happened was that back in the 60s, when it was to be administrative city, let's put this way, of the department, was that the complete reconstruction of the town of Bobigny started, and the town was treated a bit like a tabula rasa, meaning that they completely erased everything that existed in the city center. And when we say there, I said the state. Those projects were financed and encouraged by the state and by the region. One thing that is particular is that the state was responsible for the planning of the region until the 90s. The region was not able to take decisions on its own. It was mostly the state that was steering what was happening. So you would have this kind of what they went for, the design that they went for, reminding you that we were in the 60s, they went for a modernist design. So big towers, quite a lot of concrete, and this created also, if you like, this kind of like tensions of scale. That is, while the city center, if I come here, the city center was completely built from scratch. The same design went from the city center towards like more external areas of the city, creating this kind of situation where you have those same single-family homes side by side with big skyscrapers, and also you would have. So, by the way, this is the building of the. This was the prefecture. So this was the administrative building that the city center was built around. When you have that, it was quite a modern building. You would also still have the agricultural land that was being used just on their backyard in a sense. And eventually, also those agricultural activities that were moved somewhere else, and a complete reconstruction of those fields took place. This all happened like in a period of about 10 years. So like from the 60s to the 70s, there was a big decay on agricultural activities up to the point of nowadays it has been quite some time, but there are no agricultural activities in Bobigny. Other than this touch of scale, another important thing to say about, so this is the same. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. Let me situate myself. This building that I'm showing here on this photo is just in front of this another building. So as you go down the stairs over here, what you would see is the prefecture. So they did this complete reconstruction of the city center. So once the city center was finished, that's what it looked like. And as I mentioned, this was a 60s design, so it was influenced by modernist ideas that had three principles. There was the principle of living, working, and moving, all in the same design. So there was this idea that you would have everything that was related to moving in the city, being pedestrian areas, car space, bus space, whatever, all in this like lower, like on the ground level. Above that, you would have areas for work, like spaces for work, that would be like offices and like in this case public buildings, and above that like residential space, so apartment buildings. So you can see that in the like this, because it was conceived in the 60s, it was considered this car-centric design. We can see that, like, and there's a particularity of the French, modernist architecture. That is, they do this what they call like urbanism secondal. That is basically spaces that are constructed on slabs. So you create these spaces so that people can walk freely from a place to the next without having to deal with traffic. So there are like suspended bus roads, like you can see here, like this is like a staircase, and then the cars are passing underneath. Here you have like a cross point, like on top of a big avenue. Also here, like you can see, like all the circulation is kind of hidden underground. So yeah, it was not for the cars, but also that they did have pedestrians as a concern and road safety. Yeah.
The photos from the previous slide
Yeah.
and this slide, like they are taken in the 60s.
Yeah.
Years. So
Yeah.
they built everything from new.
They built everything from new. It took them about 10 years to build everything. Because if you look here, like there are no towers. If you look at this photo, there are like no towers behind it. And also here, like you have a clear view of, but this, all of this is the city center. And that's what they built on top of it. So everything was pretty new. There was like a strong interest to make like the city a quite modern city, an example for the region. At the time also, the state was much stronger. It was Charles de Gaulle that was the president at the time. So there was also like this idea of of showing like of strengthening the region of Paris, like having a strong capital, having a strong metropolitan area would also help not promote but like project France as some sort of like European power. So this was what was happening in Bobigny. And this was also in agreement with the regional strategies of the time. There is, if you look at it, this is the same map I showed you before about the population density back in the 60s. So those two maps were part of the regional strategies. What you have on your left is the rail network of the time, or at least like what they were trying to construct. And here on your right, you have the road network. Can you see a difference between the two of them?
Yeah.
What intersections?
Roads.
That
Yeah,
is-
Just like the other ones.
they are.
Other ones, more roads intersection.
Yeah. Okay. So there are more roads here. What else?
This one is more linear and that is more circular and more connected. So it goes around the city and this one looks like it is going outside and inside. Like,
Okay.
and the other one is more circular and inhabited inside.
Structured, like divided as into, I guess, like districts or
Yes.
connected.
Okay. So you say they're linear. They're linear, and where they're going to? They're linear. It's true. The railways are more linear, but they're going
Outwards.
Other cities?
outwards and
Other cities?
other cities. Yeah.
I mean, all of them are going through the center.
To the center.
Yeah, through the center.
Oh.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Even
They
though
all converge in Paris. That's what I'm trying to say. The railways, they're all converging in Paris. Well, you have the motorways. The motorways are connecting mostly the suburban areas because they have this circular shape. They're like, so if you were to put them on top of each other, they are somehow complementary. And in this logic of having motorways as the main infrastructure available for transport in the suburbs, is what justified the choice of design also of the city center of Bobigny. Bobigny was also part of this match of roads, like really just around here. So the city was very well connected to motorways, but there was no railway coming to the city of Bobigny. And as these strategies evolved, as time passed, that became a problem because Bobigny was the only town that was like. Bobigny was the only town that had such an important administrative structure happening, and was not connected to the Parisian metro. And back in the 80s, and well, not only in the 80s, like in the 80s is when the Parisian metro was actually extended to Bobigny. But from the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of protests leading, asking for this infrastructure to arrive, because, and that's important to say, Bobigny was a city that was left-leaning and had a very high amount of social housing. So it put two difficulties on. It put a big difficulty for the people that were living there to move within the region, because not everybody had the resources to like buy a car. There was a big bet that the car, in the planning of the 60s and early 70s, there was a big bet that the car was going to be the solution for our day-to-day displacement, traveling. But what happened, that was not the case at all for Bobigny, and because of that, like big protests, big things were done, so that the metro would be extended to include them in the Parisian network. So here we have two different things. We have one of those protests. There was a protest for improving the quality of life overall, organized by the French Communist Party. And one of the demands there was the arrival of the metro. And you also have here Jacques Raumont. He was an important politician. He was part of the Communist Party of France. And also, he will be consistently engaged in the politics of the town of Bobigny, but also of the Seine-Saint-Denis department over the years. And once the metro arrived, so in the 80s, like the metro did arrive, and this was part of. Okay. So I'll explain the matter. So while there was those requests for the metro, right? The plan that we had before, the plan for the roads and the plan for the railways, they were being put in place regionally. And this is what happened between 65 when those plans were laid down, and 89. So those are the roads that were actually constructed originally. The roads, so you have here on your left the railways that were actually constructed with the promise of an extension here. Okay. This number 7 would be the extension of Bobigny. You have everything else that you have, like in yellow and red, were the lines that were in fact built already at this time. And here you have the construction of motorways. So this is what happened in this period. until the 90s. And then going back to Bobby, I'll actually keep this so I can explain. So you have this railways constructed. You also have these motorways constructed, right? What was happening was that the demand of Botany for having the metro line was not only for the municipality of Botany, but for all the municipalities that were in the immediate vicinity of Paris. That's what you see over here. Like all those were promised extensions. Those cities are very close to the city of Paris. At the time, they still did not have the metro, but those were the extensions that were going to happen. And then there was, after this network was done, there was also an interest from the regional authorities in how can I say, in back towards this in the 70s, there was this new plan that came. So this was the second wave of regional plans. And with this new plan, they had an idea of a more sober way of developing. Different from what was happening in the 60s. In the 60s, they had an idea of expansion, of providing the infrastructure needed in the region so that the population could grow outwards the region. And that was a bit the role of transport infrastructure. But then when they got to the 70s, the discourses started to change a little. We're not talking about expansions anymore. We're talking about densification mostly, like making those centers, making the best use of the infrastructure that they do over these last years. And in this logic, sustainability discourses got more clearly framed. Before, there were concerns about building sustainably, but they were not phrased as such. And now, the word sustainability becomes more distinct in the strategies. And as sustainability gains strength, rail-based strategies also start to gain strength. Because there is this association that rail is a cleaner, more responsible way of developing, especially during the 70s, because there was the big oil crisis on this decade. So it also kind of put a bit of a break on the back that people were doing on car-centric design. Also, there was some developments, car-centric developments, were around long enough for people to start realizing the shortcomings of modernist planning. So there was an interest in encouraging more rail. And other than the rail as the metro, because that's also something that is important in the region, that is belonging to the city of Paris is highly associated to being connected to the metro, to the Parisian metro. Even though they have the RER, that is some sort of, as I say, it's similar to the S-Bahn system. They also have tramways, they also have regional trains. But belonging to the city of Paris, being a part of the metropolitan area, is highly associated with being nearby the metro system. So, as I mentioned, that's also why the claim of Bobigny for being included in the metro network was so strong. Because if they were a metropolitan center in the sense, why they were not connected to it? And in this logic of expansion of the expansion of the metro, there was also in that investments on tramways started to happen, being another type of rail line. And that's what was happening in the 90s in the city of Bobigny. That is, so it's funny how we go like full circle. But at the beginning of the past century, tramways were quite important for traveling, for daily travels in European cities. As the car arrived and became more accessible, and there was mass production of cars, and the roads started to be more and more adapted to cars, tramways went in disuse because their uses would clash, and it became because tramways are slower. They started to be conceptualized a little like outdated infrastructure. So quite a bit of European cities started deactivating their tramway lines and replacing it with motorways, with roads, with space for car circulation. This is what happened to this line. This was the line T1, so tramway 1. That was one of the few circular rail lines in the suburbs. So this was deactivated. So here's the limits of Paris. Bobigny is over here. This line already existed, but it was also part of this dismantling that happened some decades before. And after the city of Bobigny after the arrival of the metro at the city of Bobigny, the problem was that the metro would still only connect the city, the Bobigny, to the city center of Paris. There were no connections, though, right? Yeah.
It's really launched. It's really launched.
Oh, okay. Just no. Ah, good. So the problem was that whoever was in Bobigny did not have access to like rail connections to the vicinities, like to the towns that were around and nearby. The buses did a lot of those intersuburban connections. But then, because in the 90s, the discussion of sustainability and the path of the rail was already quite well established, they started to activate, like the municipality started to push for the reactivation of this tram line that still existed and was just not running. So that's what they managed to do in the 90s. They reactivated this tram line that was in disuse. And over the years, the line was not only reactivated, but also extended. So the original lines are those there. The original lines, like what is in between these two squares, and those are the expansions that are happening. Some of them already happening, some of them are still happening today. This last part is still happening today. To a point that the tramway was so successful that it even became some sort of like tourist attraction, because all the tramways that existed before in the city of Paris did not exist anymore. And it also set the example for the city of Paris. Nowadays, there are quite a few lines of tramways that are being restored within the city. And it was in the suburban area that it first happened. And then I just want to point attention for this person in the middle is still Georges Rougon. 20 years later, he was still engaged in the municipality of Bobigny. There's a lot to be said about the political coherence of the town over these years. Like Bobigny had left-wing mayors for nearly 100 years, which kind of like at the municipal level made it easy to like follow up on certain development agendas. So what is important particularly about this tramway it is that it was one of the first rail connections that were actually circular and had no connection whatsoever to the city of Paris. Of course, there are like connecting points that it could like change modes and go to the city, but it was the first line that was activated with the circular idea instead of to provide suburban to suburban connection instead of another connection to Paris. And this was a need that was also discussed regionally. So what was happening regionally is that they realized that okay, after all those like networks that we have done, we still don't have like rail connections that are from suburb to suburb. So at the time, like at the end of like the 90s, beginning of 2000, they had well-established regional hubs. So that's what you have here on this image. You have here City of Paris, and then you know what you have here are like different regional centers. You have the airport, so there's Uli here, there's Charles de Gaulle here. Those in orange are like new towns that were built to become like new regional centers. You have Sainte-Massy, that is like a university hub. That's why University College hub. And you also have here Mont-Lavalée, that is a new town, and it's also a university hub. So there was like an interesting connecting those points. They were very important for the economic development of the region. And the problem was that the system was a bit insufficient in the sense that if you were to take metro, for example, let's say if you are at an airport and you wanted to visit one of the universities here, what you would have to do to get there is that you go from the airport to the city center of Paris, and then from the city center of Paris to the airport. Like those connections did not exist. We are always talking about the rail here. Those connections exist if you have a car. If you don't drive, they do not exist. And in this logic, different projects started to be proposed for connecting those areas. One of those projects was the Arc Express. Again, we have here the city of Paris, as well as here the limit. So this first proposal was to create this circular line, but this circular line was quite close to the city borders. So yeah, you would have a line where you could travel, I don't know, from here to here, from here to here, without doing what you do today. That is this like kind of like back and forth to the city center of Paris. But the proposal was like a rail system quite close to the borders. Yeah.
So that was intentional to keep it close to the city border.
Yes, yes. Like the proposal, this first proposal, maybe wasn't that ambitious if you think about it originally. But the idea was that so who would benefit the most of this network were actually towns that were already in direct contact with the city of Paris, or maybe, I don't know, I would say 1 or 2 kilometers away from the borders, like the city limits. And that was the case of Bobigny. Bobigny is very close, so they would also like, Bobigny would also benefit from this network, from the circular network. But this was the proposal that was made by the region, and in the 90s, the planning responsibility, the planning regional planning, as I mentioned before, was only on the hand of the state. In the 90s, there was a separation of responsibilities where regional authorities became more independent from the state. And this was a proposal of the region for this metro network. The money was already there. They knew that there was a budget for it, and that's the proposal they came up with. However, the state had different plans. Although they did give independence to the region, they wanted to push forward a project that was more ambitious, let's put it this way. Above all, because economically, they want Paris to take like a bigger stage in the European scale. The 90s was also when the European Union was created. So there was some sort of like silent dispute to who was going to be the next capital of Europe, in a sense. And there were big investments from the state so that Paris would grow and gain importance in this political and economic discussions. And in this logic, and it was the state that came up with this design. That's what is happening today. The state went, as they had the money, then they were the ones who called the shots. So if you compare to what was shown before, like most of the lines that were concentrated here, right, in this immediate vicinity of the city of Paris. Instead, they propose a much larger network that is actually capable of connecting those centers that I just mentioned. So, for example, once this network is finished, if you are at the airport, where's the airport?
Up there.
Up there. Okay, you can go from the airport, just over here, and come to this university hall that is here, all the way through the outside of the city. You don't need to go in and then come back. Or, for example, a connection that is also important in terms of economic hubs. It's like connecting university to Saclay. So that is this technological university hub that I was mentioning. So instead of coming, I don't know, all the way here and then taking all the train or all the way here, you can just take a single line that will take you there.
So it's not like user friendly, it's because from the other line you go to the like airport and the place like South Airport, you have to go all these lines.
No, they are complementary.
It's time consuming.
They are complementary to a system that already exists. So I'll show you. So, for example, let me see if I have, otherwise I can just show you in a minute.
No, but there's just only like an S-Bahn line.
No, those stations, they are connected to other lines. So this is actually to complement. Do you have this working draw? Architects of that.
So you have both.
Yeah,
No, it's clear, yeah.
but I know I can explain to you. So basically, you have a city here, right?
Yeah.
Imagine that over the years, all the rail lines would cross Paris. Because Paris was a point of interest. So like all the metro lines would converge and create this kind of like star-shaped situation. Like it could come in many places, but the end point or the starting point was always Paris. What this network is proposing, it's actually to connect these lines that already exist. So that if you are here, you don't need to come here to go there. You can just come from here to here.
It's just, they're planning to do it.
They are already building it. So the construction started in 2013. I think I'll have to double check with you. And the idea is that the network will be done by 2030. Yeah.
So the expansion is, I don't know if I missed this, but is the population where the expansion is starting, population growing there, or is it expanding to promote the movement of people from the cities into the outside?
It's a bit of combination of both things because I'll show you here. So, one very important thing, I will use this method more times. A very important thing that happened when they decided to expand both the railways and the motorways back in the 50s was also that they said, okay, we need new towns to become new centers for the region. So they proposed 5 new towns. And those are the ones that are in orange here. Like you have Mahalalabale, Saint-Pontoise, Saint-Quentin, Étry, et même aussi oh, oui, et c'est là. So they concentrated like different infrastructures in this town to create like new regional centers. Today, most of those towns, they're connected to the city, almost like linear logic. But there are very few rail connections. So that's what like the network is trying to compensate for when they create this like circular system. And not only the towns, but also other points of interest like the airport, or even like this line, the line 14. This extension already exists. It was open for the Olympic Games. So the Olympic Games were happening here at Zambini. A big part of it in the northeast of the city, out of the city of Paris. And the line was already functioning like connecting these areas to the airport, to one of the airports at least. The next open is this one. It's a small piece of this one. By the end of this year, at least that's what it said. They're gonna open from here to here. And then, yeah, like you can see the different dates that they are expecting to open the different lines in this image. But the overall idea is that by 2030, everything is gonna be done. There are considerable delays. It's a very big build, and also they're quite like distinct. So they're not simple stations; they're quite ambitious. That's what I'm gonna talk about. To wrap it up. So this is the final design, right? I was telling you that Bobby is here. Bobby is part. So, zoom in. This line is the line of the Grand Paris Express, this project. And over here, on like this M5, is where the city center that I showed you at the beginning of the lecture was built. So now they have the metro line connected to the city of Paris. They have the tramway one that was reacted and connects Bobby to the cities next to it. But they are going to have also 3 stations from the Grand Paris Express network. That is, one of the stations is going to be connected to the existing metro line that's there. Another one is going to be at the limit of Bobigny, and another town that is called Bondy. And another one, it's going to be over there. So the border of Bobigny with Drancy. There is also a town in the vicinity. And then this is a sort of like final insertion of Bobigny in the metropolitan logic. And I'm going to explain why I'm saying that those stations are ambitious. So this is the project for the city center. So this is the same, I don't know if you recognize the building, but this is the same building that was built in the 50s to be demonstrated in the area. what happened is that now that the Greenberg Express is coming with a strong discourse of sustainability, is that they realize that the city center economy does not match the vision that they have, the region has for a sustainable way of living, because there is almost no vegetation, there's a lot of concrete, and they're kind of like renewing the city center with this in mind, like putting more trees, creating more green spaces. A lot of the spaces that were created for car circulation, is going to be repurposed either for biking, biking parking. There are quite a bit of big parking spaces that's going to be converted even into housing, because of some of those parking spaces are above the ground. If it makes sense, there are like layers of parking. So they're reducing a lot of the space for cars. They're like bringing bikes in. They're bringing vegetation in. They're backing on this insertion of new life into the city center, because it's going to be part of a larger regional network. So in many ways, they're kind of like going back from this car-centric design as much as possible, because also they cannot completely redo again the municipality. At the same time, the other tube stations that Bobigny have. So we have, as I was showing, there was tube stations that are at the, let's say, at the very border of this municipality. They have different functions. They have, for the Transit Bobigny, the idea is a bit like to insert life into an urban arrangement that is marked by the industrialization. So after the process of the industrialization, this area had a bit difficult time, like recovering, like rebounding from it. And they're betting on the station to be a place for like new commercial activities. There's over like 100 units of student housing that's going to happen around the station area. Well, for the Ponte Bondri, like the main problem in a sense was the canal that divided these two areas. So they proposed a design that would connect and like facilitate like people coming and going. What is interesting about those stations is that they were all done by very famous architects. Not only those, but all the 68 stations of the Greenberg Express. They are not uniform. They all went through some sort of there was like a competition where architects would just like come with like different proposals for those stations, and the ones that are being built are the ones that were chosen in a very competitive setting. Other than the architecture itself, all the stations were also done in partnership with an artist. So if you go inside, all of them have an artistic intervention, and this artistic intervention has to somehow mirror the history of the area just around the station, of the municipality, of the neighborhood. So all this, like, this is kind of, I find it interesting because it is a bit of, it is a bit of like a discourse for creating identity in an infrastructural system that should be somehow quite uniform in a sense. It is still a metro station, so like, although with all the different designs they're proposing. Okay, so this is a bit confusing. I'm rethinking this like shifting in scale, I think. Anyway, there are some conclusions that I drew from Bobigny when I compare them to like the original intentions and what actually was happening here. So the first being that each infrastructure wave, let's put it this way, the prefectural designation, the Metro Line 5, the T1, and the GPA stations, they are underpinned by like an ideal model of city development. So because the idea that there was of what a good city is to live changed from the 50s to today. As this idea changed, also the space has responded to it, strategies responded to it, and space responded to it. Maybe not in the way that were foreseen, but somehow. This gap between metropolitan ambitions and social space inequalities is structurally produced, not incidental, in the sense that areas that are chosen to become centers, they will keep receiving more infrastructure than other areas, even though other areas also need it equally. In this context, like WP functions a bit as a testing ground for successive planning ideologies, all imposed from above, from charismatic design to compact sustainability, and that a critically situated thought framework must acknowledge the complex interplay with infrastructure, urban form, and social justice. And then I have some questions for discussion, but maybe if you have questions, it's a bit, then I'm not going to talk more, I talked a lot already. So, otherwise I can propose some questions for us to talk a little bit more about, yeah.
Thank you so much. I wonder, when you say the third point, when you say that it's the testing ground for planning ideologies imposed from above, it is my understanding that the European general assessment is being turned from up down to bottom up. So we're involving more citizen perspectives. How is that working? Or is it working or?
Yes and no. And no, it's just, I think there are two things that we can say about Botany. First is, there is definitely a stronger interest in hearing the people that are living that when taking decisions about what is being doing in the city. However, when I talk about, for example, like if I mention that people are like, that like places for cars, for example, are being repurposed. This might seem as some sort of top-down decision because it comes along with a very particular project, but actually it also reflects the change of habits of the population that is there. Because if before, when the city was built, the idea was that each one of the inhabitants would have a car, and that was somehow the case, considering that it was more accessible back then than it was over the time. Nowadays, the population, maybe like the profile of the population changed a bit. So those spaces are not used as much anymore. With the metro, the need of having a car kind of like throw back, like there's no. And the cycling has become stronger and stronger overall in the city of Paris, and this like policies they kind of spread towards the region. What I'm trying to say is that, and that the demand for more public space also comes from the inhabitants. So it's a bit like it's two perspectives. Like there is an interest of the region of encouraging certain ways of life, but also the decisions that were made in the 50s do not reflect anymore the population that lives there nowadays. So they kind of go hand in hand. At the same time, they can also be a bit conflictuous. Because also, I don't talk so much about it, but I tried to show how some changes were aligned with what was what was thought regionally. But definitely there were moments that those things were clashing. For example, at the beginning, the reurbanization of the city, because I'm sure that all the people that were living there and had their livelihood based on agriculture did not agree with the destruction of the fields that they took their livelihood from. And also explains why the profile of people that live there changed, because certain economic activities were not possible anymore.
You showed us the initial plan that was closer to the city, and then you said that then we have the other one that was implemented.
Yeah.
When you were talking about that, you said that these people had the money, so they did what they wanted to. Sounded like that was a better plan, and this was somewhat not aligned. So I just wanted to know what were the main differences between, because I can see that it has expanded more, but I see it is also well connected to outer parts of the city that is more projected towards the future also, like in the coming future, the Paris will grow outwards also, can not only grow vertically. So just wanted to know a few differences, or do you think that the other design, the first one that was initially planned, was better, or not? I got that out of your statement.
You mean like why this one, not the one that was proposed? Like roughly why this one? Not? So
And what was the key differences?
yeah, if you think about scale, like when we look at this one, this proposal that came from the region, if this was implemented, the scale would be a bit like this first ring over here.
Mhm.
So it's not that this project was completely discarded.
It was kept.
It was incorporated into a broader strategy. The differences between them, I think they are trying. This is actually an interest. It's an example of like political tension, because so the region, the organization that was responsible for regional planning, Instituto Region, came up with this proposal because they are the actors that are engaged more actively with regional issues, right? They are aware of everything that is happening. They are the one like doing the studies. Their studies led to this design. And even now it's definitely a metro, but there were big discussions about what kind of infrastructure would do these connections. There was even a proposal that in some parts there would actually be a tramway. So, and in the end they decided to go for the metro. This design was in many ways an imposition from the state. As I mentioned, so this first circle, let's put it this way, was what was proposed roughly. But also there was at the time that this project was approved, it was Nicolas Sarkozy. That was the president of France. I don't know if you're familiar with French politics, but he is quite right-leaning.
He was the
Yeah. So he during his mandate, he invited. He did like an international consultation. So he invited like a team of architects, 10 teams of different architects from Europe, to come up with a proposal for this project. It's very unclear of how much of each proposal he actually incorporated into the design. But they came up with this this design that would connect the main hubs, let's say the main points of interest of the region. And he just released it on a press conference without necessarily informing the regional planning authorities. So yeah, so I did an interview with one of the people that used to work at this organization, and she told me that she actually learned about it on the newspaper. Well, they've been already working for it on like a plan, like a regional plan that would accommodate it for the past 2 years. So yeah, there's also that. There's also like a political interest, and for Nicolas Sarkozy also there was this interest of, as I was mentioning before, like to launch Paris as an economic and an economic like hub for Europe, and there was a strong belief that for that they needed a good transport network. That was one of the, among other things, obviously. And even the first, some because like the design, like where the line were going to pass, was kind of subtle when Nicolas Sarkozy announced it. But the number of stations and where those stations were going to be was not settled. And then one of the things that they considered doing is that not having as many stations, but just stations where like it was somehow economically interesting. So what was going to happen is that you'd have this like massive network passing through these municipalities, but they wouldn't actually benefit from it. Just this point or this point, like points of, like those would be like the stops that they would have, and this created like a big discussion because to construct this network, we had to like displace quite a lot of people because especially in the northeast, it's quite a densely populated area. So to build the metro, they had to undo a lot of social housing also. That is a big discussion and a big argument for people that are against construction. But at this point also, it got to a point that there is no point being against the construction because it's already happening. So yeah, so that's, I wouldn't say so much a difference of design, but a difference in political interest.
The budget was like to 25 billion euros, like you showed on the slide, in 2012. Like I'm sure that they would have exceeded it now because they have increased the lines also. The Grand Palace Express, which was 25 billion euros. Do you know?
Yeah, they passed this budget already.
Okay.
I don't remember by how much, but they exceeded the budget. There are also delays that are making that it costs more than what they thought it's going to cost. So yeah, and actually there's also like this created a lot of tension between the region of Paris and the other big towns in France, because if the money is coming from the state and they're investing so much money in Paris, it means that like there was the money for them to invest in other cities of France that also are in need of infrastructure. So yeah, it's some sort of Paris is like the only center, the only pole of France. It's different, for example, from let's say Italy. Italy, like there's Rome, there's Milan, as also Napoli has a similar role when you talk about like national negotiations. But in France, other than there are of course metropolitan areas that are strong, but if like most of the money and economic hold of the country is in Paris, also like a fifth. I think about it. No, there are about 65 million people living in France. 12 million, almost 13, are in the metropolitan region of Paris. So there's also like quite a bit of the population that is concentrated there, which some they use as an argument to concentrate state money. Yeah. Have I got you?
Have you seen any other cities that follow a similar pattern or projects that are going on? Or maybe this was inspired by another city or anything?
There are quite some bits. I think actually, when I first started studying it, I was quite surprised that Paris didn't have circular lines. Because, for example, Berlin has a very big circular line. London as well. London, I don't remember exactly how many, but I think maybe one or two. I remember there is one circular line, but it's on the city center. Yeah, I don't know so much to the outer city. To my knowledge, that's the first time I see it regionally. Because also the one in Berlin is quite. It's in the city, right? It's within the city of Berlin. Yeah. So yeah, there are many problems, many tensions and discussions about it. It didn't stop it from being built. So, yeah. Do you have any questions? Yes. I thought we have a bit of time. I thought of proposing like a short discussion. I don't know exactly how many you are, but maybe you could divide yourselves in 4 groups. If that's okay, and I'll just assign each one of those questions to the group. And my idea is that you, for example, if you have a group here, I will assign you with question 1. You're going to talk a little about that. And then we take like just 5 minutes and then so that someone can share what the group discussed mostly. Yeah. So you can divide yourself as you like, more or less same numbers, or I can assign numbers, whatever kind of.
4 groups of 3.
4 groups of 3. Okay.
Or bench one.
That's nice.
I don't trust it. I'm not counting trust. Yeah. Okay, so 4 groups of 4. Yeah, just